Most people in Hawkins thought Robin Buckley was just another smart-mouthed weirdo with too many opinions and not enough patience. But what if they were right, just not in the way they thought? What if the girl working at Scoops Ahoy wasn't just clever with words and a killer ear for languages, but had something else hiding underneath? What if Robin Buckley had powers like 11? Not because she was born with them, but because someone built them into her, one test at a time. She was 16 when the letter came, sealed with a Department of Education stamp, all official looking and slightly intimidating. The invitation was clear. Robin had been selected for a government-funded accelerated learning program. A special boarding school, full scholarship, room and board, early college credit, a shot at getting out of Hawkins. For a girl who'd spent most of high school being side-eyed in the hallways and mocked in the locker rooms, it felt like a ticket to another planet. Joyce Byers once described Hawkins as a place where nothing ever happens, but for Robin, too much happened, and none of it made sense. She didn't fit in, not with the cheerleaders, not with the burnout kids, not even with the band geeks. She spent her time memorizing obscure Soviet radio frequencies and correcting the grammar in old-school sci-fi paperbacks. So when this opportunity came, she didn't hesitate. Her parents weren't exactly thrilled, but the people in suits talked fast and waved shiny brochures, and Robin packed her bags. The school was just 2 hours outside of town, buried past the tree line behind what looked like a military testing site. The building was sleek, windowless, and far too quiet. On paper, it was called the Stetson Institute for Cognitive Advancement. The staff called it the program. At first, it really was a dream. Robin aced the logic drills, solved puzzles meant to take hours in 15 minutes flat. Her memory tests broke records. The instructors smiled tightly and wrote things down in notebooks without speaking. She didn't care. She was finally around people who didn't ask her to explain every joke or tone herself down. But by the end of week 2, things felt off. One of the other students, Becca, a quiet girl from Michigan, just stopped showing up to sessions. Her bed was made the next day like she'd never existed. Another boy had a nosebleed during lunch and was gone before dessert. Robin started noticing locked rooms, security cameras, tech that looked way too advanced for a government grant. They told her she was special, that her mind worked in rare ways, that the emotional sensitivity she'd always tried to suppress was actually a gift, so they started testing it. They hooked wires to her temples, asked her to focus on the emotional state of people behind glass walls, asked her to describe what they might be feeling. At first, it felt like educated guessing, but then she started getting it right. Too often, too easily. She told herself it was intuition, body language, micro-expressions, but deep down, she knew better. It didn't feel like school anymore. She was pulled out of class for private evaluations, asked to listen to white noise and identify the emotional tone of random words. Her sleep schedule changed. She woke up exhausted, restless, sometimes with memories she didn't recognize as hers. Then one night, unable to sleep, Robin left her dorm. She wandered the east hallway, a part of the building no one ever mentioned. The air felt colder there. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were trying to whisper. She heard humming, low, electric, familiar. That's when she found the door. It wasn't labeled, just a black panel with a keypad. No guards, no cameras, just that unsettling silence. She didn't break in, not then, but something shifted, like the air itself had taken a breath, like the hallway had seen her. She turned and left, but her mind was racing. The next morning, her breakfast tray had a folder on it, thin, unmarked, but inside, coded notes, redacted names, a project label stamped in the corner, Indigo, and another, smaller word beneath it, 011. Robin didn't know who 11 was, not yet, but something inside her clicked. All those strange moments, Becca disappearing, the headaches, the hallucination she had of her father screaming when he wasn't even in the room. It wasn't paranoia, it was the program, and she was next. The folder didn't say much. Most of it was blacked out, but Robin didn't need names to recognize what she'd stumbled into. Each page read like a checklist of everything she'd been feeling since the day she got here. Emotional transference, hypersensitive sensory conditioning, neuroelasticity under duress. They weren't teaching her, they were transforming her. She stopped sleeping normally after that. Her mind was always buzzing, not racing with thoughts, buzzing like a soft static layered behind her brain. It pulsed when she entered certain rooms, reacted when instructors passed too close. She started picking up feelings that weren't hers, waves of panic, sadness, or rage, sharp and sudden, hitting her like someone turning on a radio inside her chest. At first, it was just noise, but then the signal got clearer. They moved her to a smaller room and changed the exercises. The walls were thicker. There were no clocks. They called it isolation immersion. She called it what it was: containment. They were watching how far she'd go before breaking. The only reason she didn't is because she learned how to fake it. That became her new skill, pretending not to notice when the air changed, pretending she didn't feel her neighbor's dread through the walls. She joked to herself that she was like an emotional sponge with insomnia. She didn't find it funny. One day during an observation drill, they placed her behind glass. On the other side was a woman, maybe late 30s, strapped into a chair. Electrodes attached to her scalp, eyes wide with panic. They told Robin to identify the subject's mood. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The terror in the air hit her like a freight train. She almost collapsed. When the trial ended, they sat her alone in a dark room. No one spoke. But the next day, she found her chart left open on the desk while an assistant stepped out. It had a new classification at the bottom. Category B, empathic receiver, latent telepathic projection. Whatever was happening, they thought it was working. The walls of the facility started to feel lighter, not physically, mentally, like her thoughts were no longer just hers. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she could feel someone watching from the inside. She wondered if that meant she was becoming something else, or worse, someone else. She started pushing back. She'd always been good at subtext, at reading people in conversations, at saying the thing that made people uncomfortable in just the right way. Now it was more than words. She began to mimic the emotions she absorbed, played them back like recordings to see how others reacted, and it worked. She could throw people off their rhythm, make them hesitate, change the energy in the room just by pushing a little harder. It scared her, but it also gave her power, and for the first time since arriving, she had a plan. She memorized guard rotations, vent routes, and badge codes she'd overheard when no one thought she was listening. She stopped eating her pills. They weren't helping her sleep, they were blurring her memory. She spit them out when no one was watching. She stashed them behind loose wall tiles and watched as her mind cleared and sharpened. On the 8th week, a system error triggered a lockdown. Red lights flashed across the halls. Alarms didn't blare, they buzzed low and deep, more disorienting than loud. Robin was rerouted with a group of personnel to a lower wing for containment protocol. It wasn't part of the main program's area. That's where she saw her. A girl, young, shaved head, blank stare, being led down a corridor by 2 guards. She wasn't struggling, just walking, like her body was moving without her. Robin stopped, frozen behind a security mirror. The moment was maybe 5 seconds, but that's all it took. Because the second their eyes met, something snapped. It wasn't just emotion this time, it was memory. A flood, screaming, darkness, blood on white tile, a door slamming. Robin didn't know what she was seeing. It wasn't hers, it belonged to the girl, but it poured into her like water through a broken dam. She collapsed. By the time she came to, the girl was gone, and she was back in her cell. 2 nurses monitored her vitals. She pretended to be confused, played dumb, but everything had changed. That girl had felt like a mirror, and now Robin had seen what the program really was. From that day on, she kept to herself, didn't crack jokes, didn't ask questions. She became the perfect subject, obedient, consistent, emotionally flat. But inside, her mind was racing. She no longer just wanted to escape, she wanted to expose all of it. She knew that wouldn't happen through brute force, so she played their game. Played it well. Earned their trust again. Enough that they reinstated her access to the study terminals, the ones connected to the old mainframe. That's where she found it. Project INDIGO, the parent program that predated her own. A tree of test subjects, each with a number instead of a name. Notes on MKUltra and cognitive control trials. Off-site surveillance logs from small towns in Indiana. And tucked inside a subfolder, video stills labeled 011. Same girl, same stare. Robin closed the file, heartbeat thudding in her throat. They weren't building geniuses, they were building weapons. She started preparing her exit. She requested recalibration, faking a neurological spiral to get reassigned to a lower security medical wing. There, she forged incident logs to schedule an internal transfer during a known power cycle dip in the surveillance grid. She smuggled a folded floor plan in the helm of her sweater. It was all paper, no digital trace. If she failed, there'd be nothing left to connect her plan to anyone else. For days, she practiced. Not the escape, her face, the boredom, the detachment, the version of herself they had designed. It had to be airtight. She couldn't afford one flinch, because she wasn't just running. She was going to steal something before she left. Evidence, proof, names. On the night she left, she didn't look back, didn't think, just moved. Hall by hall, gate by gate. Her power didn't knock out doors or crush skulls, but it told her when someone was near, when fear spiked, when suspicion started to rise. It was enough. She reached the edge of the forest before the alarm even started, and then she was gone. They thought she was dead. That was the story filed after Robin Buckley vanished from the Hawkins lab program. Accidental breach, exposure to unresolved anomaly, presumed fatality. A few lines of cold government text erased her from the roster. There was no funeral. Her parents never got a call. The program had ways of making people forget. But Robin wasn't gone. She had simply gone underground. It started with movement. Quiet, small, careful. She wandered for days, sleeping in abandoned cabins and empty train yards, stealing food from gas stations, hitching rides toward anywhere that didn't smell like antiseptic and fear. Her mind was frayed, the emotional residue of everything she'd absorbed still lingering in the corners. People's feelings stuck to her like fog. Panic, rage, loss, all of it echoed without context. She learned to filter it out, to dull the noise. Somewhere along the way, she shaved her head and burned her old ID badge, not because she needed to, but because it helped. The Robin they made in the lab was dead. What remained was something colder, sharper. She wasn't a weapon, she was a problem they hadn't accounted for, and she was just getting started. In the months that followed, Robin began to use her real talent, not just her brain, not just the vague psychic buzz behind her eyes, but her ability to see systems, patterns, vulnerabilities. She wasn't a hacker in the traditional sense. She didn't need a computer to break things. She used payphones and torn receipts. She memorized badge numbers, backdoor entries, license plates. She mapped the movement of lab trucks and service routes. She made herself a ghost inside the machine. She became their shadow. While Dr. Brenner and his people kept looking for new children to test, Robin was out there, rerouting their shipments, leaking breadcrumbs of data to reporters who didn't know what they had. She didn't need to go public. She just needed the cracks to start forming from the outside. She sent an anonymous tip to Hopper once, a burner letter, handwritten in sharp, spiky script. It warned of activities near the Hawkins power substation. No name, no return address, but it got his attention. She wasn't ready to reach out directly, not yet, not even to him. The irony, of course, was that she ended up back in Hawkins anyway, not because she had to, because she chose to. There was something about that place, the way it sat too still, like the world kept circling it but never touched it. A wound that refused to heal. Robin had the same feeling growing in her gut that she had back in the lab, like the static had come home to roost. So she slipped back in unnoticed, set up in an old maintenance shack behind the high school, rewired the power, spliced into a forgotten radio tower, scavenged from the AV Club's leftover gear. She didn't need to be loud, she just needed to listen. That's when she heard it. The name. Vecna. At first, she thought it was a code name, a signal, but the more she picked up, intercepted police calls, grainy radio chatter, late night weeping from kids on walkie-talkies, the more she realized this wasn't just another monster. This was bigger. The Mind Flayer had always felt like a network to her, cold, logical, layered. But this, Vecna, was something else. Personal, surgical. It didn't blanket the world with dread. It reached inside and pulled. It understood pain the same way the lab had, and that made her furious. She tracked the group from a distance. Mike, Dustin, Max, Lucas, and Steve. They didn't know she was watching, that she had mapped their movements, memorized their routines. She could have stepped in any time, but she didn't want to cause chaos, not until she knew what they were dealing with. When she saw Max break down at the cemetery, something inside her cracked, not because she knew her, because she recognized the look. That fragile silence right before something breaks. She'd seen it in the lab, in herself, in the mirror on the night she escaped. She couldn't stay hidden anymore. Her reappearance was subtle. A coffee order dropped on the counter just a little too fast. A book slid across the library table. A half smile tossed in Steve's direction before she disappeared again. She let the familiarity settle before she said anything. Let them think maybe they'd just missed her all along. By the time she finally reconnected with Steve, it wasn't a reunion, it was a reveal. She told him bits, not everything. Enough to explain where she'd been. Not enough to scare him. She still wore her sarcasm like armor. Still talked fast and moved faster. But her eyes had changed. She wasn't just Robin anymore. She was something more. When things fell apart, again, Robin didn't hesitate. She joined the group like she had never left. But what they didn't see was what she did after the lights went out. She would stay up, fingers to the radio, scanning frequencies the others didn't know existed. Listening to chatter from abandoned government outposts, catching whispers from the edges of the Upside Down, and sometimes, just sometimes, she'd hear her. 11. Not in words, not even in sound, but in feeling. A pull, a pressure, a memory of the corridor and the eye contact and the flood of grief that wasn't hers. Robin would close her eyes and push back, softly, a whisper through the static, not to say goodbye, but to say, I'm still here. In the end, she was never the strongest. She couldn't lift trucks with her mind, couldn't throw monsters through walls, but she understood people. She could feel when they were about to break. She could pick the lie out of a conversation by the weight behind a word. She knew how fear shaped people, and how guilt echoed louder than screams. She used that, turned it into strategy, into sabotage, into survival. She'd been built in the shadows, but she'd chosen to live in the light. And when the final battle came, when Hawkins split open again and monsters poured through, Robin wasn't just another teenager with a flashlight. She was the secret weapon no one had seen coming. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.